Hi, I'm Stephen Long. I'm the publisher of 12 Willows Press, an environmental book publisher. And today I'm here with three of the people who have submitted to my new anthology, Rivers of Ink. We have Meadow, Avalon, and we have Ret. I have a few questions to ask you, and I'll start with you, Rue. Rue, your story is entitled Into the Woods, and it's from a book that you've written, correct?
It is, yep. I started out in Maine as a journalist and was telling other people's stories, but really always wanted to focus on my own stories, particularly for children.
Okay.
And so after many years as a journalist here in Maine, I began writing for children, and the excerpt from my current work in progress that's in the anthology has to do with a 12-year-old girl who's camping in Maine for the summer with her family after the death of her twin sister, who has passed away from complications related to cerebral palsy.
Okay.
And so that was an experience that was based on our family, who also lost a child from complications.
Which you wrote a book about.
Yes,
okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I really wanted to explore it in the middle grade market, primarily because of my own children.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. And Avalon, so what inspires you with your writing?
Living in this time as like a teen is a lot of what I focus my poetry especially on, and nature a lot as well.
What do you find inspiring in nature?
Well, I usually like to go outside when I'm writing and like walk near a river or sometimes climb up in a tree, and that just lets me think more clearly.
Do you do the writing out there, or do you come back inside to write?
Sometimes I'll do it outside, but also inside.
All right.
Depends.
And Ret, so you are a professional, a writer, a journalist. So tell me a little bit about the piece that you submitted to the book.
The piece I submitted actually is, I wrote a series of 10 essays as I was beginning to work on the sample chapter for my next book. And my wife, who's a scientific illustrator, when she starts a new piece, she creates a series of studies. And each study helps her become more comfortable as she sort of moves around the piece, focuses on different aspects. And so I decided to take that approach with my new book and to write a series of 10 essays that each sort of got at what I wanted to get at, but from a little bit of a different angle.
Okay.
So that's where it began.
All right. Wonderful. So, what is the theme of your submission then?
The theme of my submission, I think, is I think it's about ways of knowing. I think it's about ways of knowing the world. And I think, as nature writers, I think all of us, we go into nature, we observe nature, we process nature, and then we try to communicate nature to our readers. And we each, need to find our process that works for us.
Okay. Meadow, your piece, how is it connected to the Penobscot?
Well, growing up, my family did a lot of camping and hiking in Maine, but we mostly stuck to the kind of Route 1 corridor, going up to Acadia. And while I was working on an early draft of my book, a friend recommended to me an inn on Coldstream Pond in Enfield, Maine, which is just south of Lincoln. And so I headed up there for a weekend, and I took the back roads following the Penobscot River from Old Town up to Lincoln. And I was so inspired by the beauty of the river and that area that became the inspiration for the setting of my book.
All right. Yeah. So now, Avalon, you are in high school.
Yes.
So what grade are you in?
I'm in 9th grade.
9th grade. So what are your favorite subjects right now?
Art and English.
Art and English. Are you doing much writing in English?
Not much of my own writing, but
Okay.
we do a lot of really helpful writing exercises in English.
Okay. All right. And do you have a writing program in the high school as well, or?
Nope.
No. Okay. Ret, what role can Indigenous stories play in your writing?
That's a big one, and that is essentially at the heart of my next book. I think traditional ecological knowledge, which is how we sort of formally refer to generations of knowledge that are held by First Nations, Indigenous peoples. There is so much information there that is so valid and at the same time so marginalized. I'm a science writer, and so as a science writer, we oftentimes look to the peer-reviewed literature when I'm writing a piece for National Geographic or Discover or something like that. We oftentimes don't have access to, sometimes appropriately so, that traditional ecological knowledge, and there is so much to learn there. So if we consider climate change, for example, and we consider the threats to various species as a result of climate change, conservation biology, our collection of data, that's great, and we know a lot, but there's so much knowledge that we're not even considering, and we need to. And so that's something I'm grappling with in my own writing, and tried to grapple with a little bit in that essay for the anthology.
Okay. Meadow, your story, or your book touches a little bit on basket making, correct?
It does, and I think there I really need to bow also to the indigenous community in Maine, which has a phenomenal history of basket making that I really admire and look up to. And I had actually pitched basket making to several publications prior to writing this book. Nobody took me up on it, and yet I was really inspired by that history, not just of Maine's first people, but also in my own family. My great-grandfather built a house in Cape Nettic sometime before World War II, and 3 generations of my family ended up living in that area. And later on in life, I met a man named Jake Weir, who worked for my great-grandfather down there in the York area. And I met him when he was in his 80s, and he was still harnessing his own team of horses, going out into the woods to fell an ash tree to bring back and split into weavers to make his own baskets. He was very well known in that community and had learned his own basket making tradition from the Agamenicus community, from Scottish and Irish immigrants who came to that area in the 1600s. And so, having met and interviewed Jake and seen this process of basket making, I wanted to feature that in my book, and actually learned how to make a basket.
I was just going to ask you.
Just one. So I wanted to get my hands on it and try it firsthand. But the ash trees, the importance of ash trees to Maine, to the indigenous community, and also to our natural landscape, all of those things were very important to me in my story.
How big of an ash tree do they use to make a basket?
On the smaller side, from what I understand, and when I did it, I was working from weavers that someone else had already produced, but I would imagine something with a diameter, about that
and do they make it out of the bark or the?
It's actually the rings of growth from the tree that they pound to separate to make a basket. And I know that is something that's traditionally done by the Penobscot people, the Wabanaki, Indians of Maine, but also was done by potato harvesters, or the folks who used potato baskets up in Aroostook County, and also down in York. So I wanted to write a story that included that, but does not take away from the indigenous community's own experience of basket making.
How did your basket come out, by the way?
It's a little wobbly. I use it actually to store extra wrapping, stuffing for boxes to ship things to people. When you get like bubble wrap and you don't know what to do with it, that's where it goes.
Wonderful.
So,
I'm sure mine would be wobbly too if I made a basket. So Avalon, what is the goal of your writing?
I have some longer stories that I'm working on that I wish to get published someday. And a lot of poetry that I would also like to get published.
All right. So we have older people here that are kind of focused in their life. What kind of goals do you have? I know you're a freshman in high school, but what are you kind of thinking of at this point down the road, if you're interested in answering?
I don't know if I want to pursue a professional writing career, but if I could, then I would definitely want to do that. I just want to be someone's favorite author.
That's all right. That's all right. What other interests outside of writing do you have?
I do a lot of art, like painting and drawing.
Do you have any favorite painters or artists that you could call offhand? I'm horrible with names myself, so.
Yeah, I don't know if I could think of any.
All right. What is your style of painting that you like to do, or art?
I do a lot of impressionism.
Impressions,
art, so,
okay.
Yeah.
So do you do like watercolor, oil, acrylics?
I haven't really gone into oils much. I do a lot of acrylic and gouache. painting.
Gouache, okay. Wonderful. Ret, do you do any art outside of writing?
I don't. I live with a full-time scientific illustrator, so I visit her studio to check in on her, and she's my best editor. No offense.
No, that's all right.
But no, I don't. Although I do think of writing as an art. I think maybe all three of us can appreciate this. I oftentimes struggle a little bit when she shares her work with an audience in her gallery, for example. People can walk in, look at a painting, have an experience with it, and talk about it right away. When I want to share my work, or when we as writers want to share our work, somebody has to sit down for 10, 15, 20, several hours to actually read it before they can interact with it and then interact with me. So I'm envious of artists in that regard, of visual artists.
You
talked about the ash. So what about the ash borer?
Right. So I mentioned our family had lost a daughter, Ruth, who had cerebral palsy. About a year after she passed away, I was serving on the Bath City Council, and someone had come in to give a presentation to the council about the emerald ash borer and trying to help the city prepare for the inevitable destruction of the city's ash trees. And it was so close to my own loss of a child. Hearing that an entire species was going to be wiped out by a small invasive beetle really struck me.
And a beautiful beetle at that.
Yeah, it is a very beautiful beetle, and it seems to be, at this point, mostly unstoppable.
Yeah.
And I think to me that was really the strongest picture I had as a mother for wishing I could stop something that was unstoppable in my own family. And so that really became really sort of a symbol for me in my story about what do we do with those things in life that are so big and so devastating that we can't stop them, and yet we have to find a way to continue living in a way that's productive and constructive and still enjoys the beauty, that we have around us. And so that becomes a part of my story as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think that we'll be able to stop the ash borer in Maine? And I know we're not scientists here, but the ash borer is a concern of mine as well.
I actually spent some time talking to a state entomologist who they do have some tools and some techniques that they can use individually on trees and also to help the trees recover once the sort of initial sweep of the beetle has come through Maine, that there will still be some trees that survive, and there is hope for the future, I think, for that species, but I think in the interim, we're going to see a lot of devastation.
Okay. Avalon, how do your creative outlets overlap?
Well, I do a lot of painting, and a lot of times the paintings that I do will be inspired by my writing, or vice versa.
Okay. So what kind of fiction writing do you do?
Right now I'm working on a fantasy story.
Okay.
Yeah, that's taking up a lot of my time.
Do you do a lot of fantasy writing, or is this something new for you?
I've been working on this story for like 3 years, so pretty much just this one, but I've been working on it for a long time.
Do you read fantasy as well and kind of inspired by it then?
Yeah.
Okay. What kind of other writing have you done, Ret, outside of scientific writing?
My first love was fiction, and I began with fiction. I learned quickly that it was difficult to make a full-time living writing fiction. I do hope one day to return to fiction. But science writing has really been my sweet spot for the last bunch of years. And in many ways, science writing is not terribly unlike fiction writing at times.
Yeah.
All writing is, it's all about arc, it's all about story, it's all about connecting with your audience, knowing your audience. Writing is writing.
Yes, it is.
And I think that's exciting. It's also a little daunting.
It can be.
Yes.
It can be. What is the purpose of nature writing for you, Rue?
Okay, so I would say growing up, one of the few things my family, a very small family, but that we actually did together was to spend time outside in nature. I grew up on a little farm, and then just the camping and hiking we did when I was younger. And so I think, after the death of our daughter, I found a lot of solace in nature, just walking. I'm not an avid outdoorsman. You won't find me on Maine's highest peaks, but just walking down the road, in the morning with my dog, stopping to look at the first, flakes of snow or the light coming through the trees. It helps me, I think of life beyond the immediate troubles that we may experience. And so I wanted to set the family in my story in a very natural setting where they too could kind of find some of the healing that takes place in nature.
I was just thinking of, nature writing. So I think about, as a science writer, I'm oftentimes writing about nature. I'm writing about, environmental issues perhaps within nature. For me, it's about lens, and I think writing is oftentimes about lens. We have to decide what lens we're going to use in any particular piece. So science writing, I'm oftentimes coming at a story through the lens of data, through the lens of reporting. But when you get into nature writing and sort of this reverence, and I don't know how you guys feel, but for me, I struggle a little bit, or I don't struggle, but I think nature writing is about evangelism in a lot of ways. We live in a world where it's oftentimes more difficult to connect with nature. I know we haven't really defined that term, and that's a problematic term in and of itself, but we live in a world where it's sometimes difficult to connect with nature, and so writing is an opportunity for us to share our passion for nature with people who may not necessarily connect with nature, and maybe even inspire them to want to connect with nature in new ways.
One of the reasons when I founded my company, 12 Willows Press, was that I have two children of my own, a 21-year-old and a 14-year-old. And I had subbed a couple years prior to that, and so I worked with all these kids, and I was seeing such hope. And yet you come home, you listen to the radio, and you hear so much unfortunate news about ice caps and overheating and temperatures rising and record-breaking whatever. And so it gets really disconcerting. And so I get really down. And all I hear is the negative. But yet I look at the children and I'm like, how can they have so much hope? How can you have so much hope when you hear so much negativity? But yet, you get up every morning, you go to school, yeah, your parents make you. But ultimately, you're still going to school, you're making plans for life. How do kids do that? That's what I want to tap into. So that was one of the goals for my anthology, was that it's like, okay, so things have been bad with the river, but things are they're improving. So what do the people think about it? What is their connection to it? So what can you tell me about hope for you in your writing?
We live under such a disconnect today from the natural world, and we're so saturated with negative images and news and destructive things that are happening around us that we really can't control. And I think, you talked about sort of wanting to ask, like, what kind of gives us hope going forward. And I think, any type of loss, like nobody gets to go through life loss free. I thought I was exempt. It didn't work out that way. But for me, I think writing about the nature, the natural world and nature in my stories is a way to kind of connect with something I think we've lost touch with as a society. We're so disconnected from each other and from the natural world. And I think spending more time in nature is a way to get closer to each other and also kind of consider something larger than ourselves, and what a great gift we've been given. And so I think that's something I really hope to inspire young people with my writing, is to just maybe slow down and appreciate more of what's around us instead of the things that are sort of bombarding us.
Well, that was what was fun with with the anthology, reading the submissions, because people would mention the pollution, the bad things that have happened in the past, and the chemicals. But it was also interesting to see how much the river has improved. It has a long ways to go, but it's just astounding to hear how much has changed over the last 2-3 decades, and so it does certainly give us hope. And certainly for younger generations, if they choose to stay within the area or not, it's all very crucial. So.
And we're just so fortunate in Maine to have so many still places that look not so highly influenced by people, you know, and as more people discover that, you know, that the landscape changes a little bit. But hopefully we can find a way to continue protecting the natural world in a way that allows people to experience it in the state that it first existed, rather than, you know, climbing up a road, you know, bumper to bumper with cars and trying to get to the next peak or to the next beach. You know, it's hard to see, it's hard to preserve those places once people discover how beautiful they are.
It certainly is.
Yeah.
It certainly is.
Yeah, hope is an important thing, and I think it's I think in nature writing, there is a lot to, or in science writing and nature writing, there's a lot to be pessimistic about, and finding that hope, I think, is, you know, in your communications with us, that really sort of made me sort of rethink. A lot of times my writing as a journalist is dealing with the problems and not necessarily dealing with the hope as much. One of the things that I find very empowering, and something that I tried to touch on in my essay and the piece, is that it doesn't always take a broad, sweeping change to see benefits. We don't need to, you know, stop something entirely, or we don't need to change our lives entirely. Sometimes smaller acts can really have what might appear to be an outsized effect. And so, you know, in my piece I talked about white sharks, for example, and, you know, you have a white shark, which is a K-selected species. That means they mature very late in life. They don't mature till they're 30 years old, sexual maturity. They live to 70 years of age. You remove a couple of those individuals and you can have a dramatic effect on that population. But the flip side is that if you protect a couple individuals, you can have a really positive effect. And that's empowering. And I think, you know, working on this anthology really helped me to remember that that's as important a story to tell, if not more important.